I am a homeless woman, and a millionaire found me on the street. He got me pregnant, and we had a child. Everyone laughed at him for bringing me into his house. But 2 years later, everyone regretted it. I never thought that a simple disguise would lead me to discover not just love, but my true self. That cold December morning in New York City started like any other day of my social experiment. Me, Alexandra Wellington, heiress to the Wellington Industries fortune, wrapped in worn-out clothes, blending in with Manhattan's homeless population. The biting wind whipped through the concrete canyons of Wall Street as early morning traders and bankers hurried past, clutching their designer briefcases and steaming coffee cups. For 3 months, I'd been living this double life, sleeping in shelters and experiencing firsthand the struggles of those less fortunate. It wasn't just some rich girl's whim. I was gathering real data for my doctoral dissertation in social economics at Columbia University. My research focused on wealth inequality and social mobility, but I never expected it to change my entire life's trajectory. That morning was particularly brutal. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and my thin jacket did little to shield me from the relentless cold. I was huddled in a doorway near the imposing glass facade of Atlantic Global Bank, trying to warm my hands with my breath, when he first appeared. James Morrison, though I didn't know his name then, stood out even among the well-dressed crowd. His tailored charcoal suit and commanding presence marked him as someone important, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. While others passed by with carefully cultivated indifference, he actually saw me. He stopped, and for a moment, our eyes met. I quickly looked down, maintaining my character, but I could feel his gaze lingering. Then, without a word, he took off his expensive cashmere coat and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth of the wool and the lingering scent of his cologne enveloped me immediately. "Please," he said softly, his voice carrying a gentle authority that matched his appearance. "It's too cold to be out here without proper protection." Before I could respond, he pulled out his wallet and handed me a business card along with several $100 bills. "There's a shelter 3 blocks from here that offers warm meals and job training programs. Ask for Sarah. She's a friend who helps people get back on their feet." I was speechless, not just from the unexpected kindness, but from the genuine concern in his eyes. This wasn't the performative charity I'd often witnessed during my experiment. This was real, unfiltered compassion. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, staying in character despite an overwhelming urge to reveal my true identity. He nodded, a small smile softening his features, before disappearing into the stream of pedestrians entering the bank. I sat there, wrapped in his coat, studying the business card in my hands. James Morrison, Executive Vice President of Atlantic Global Bank. The embossed letters seemed to shimmer under the weak winter sunlight, and I felt an unexpected flutter in my stomach. That evening, in my secret journal where I documented my experiences, I wrote pages about our brief encounter. As I lay in my designated bed at the shelter, where I stayed to maintain the authenticity of my research, I couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't just his kindness that affected me. It was the way he treated me with dignity when most people wouldn't even make eye contact. The next morning, I made a decision that would alter both our lives forever. I would go to his office, return his coat, and reveal my true identity. It was a risky move that could compromise my research, but something deep inside told me this was more important than my academic pursuits. Little did I know that this simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of wealth. As I prepared to meet him again, this time as myself, I had no idea that we were both about to be caught in a web of family obligations, corporate intrigue, and a love story that would test our values and strength in ways neither of us could have imagined. I spent that night carefully planning my approach, knowing that the next day would change everything. The coat he'd given me hung in my temporary shelter locker, a tangible reminder of the connection we'd shared, however brief. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that fate had something extraordinary in store for both of us, something that would transcend our different worlds and challenge everything we thought we knew about love and sacrifice. The following morning, I transformed back into Alexandra Wellington. Gone were the shabby clothes and disheveled appearance, replaced by a tailored Chanel suit and the polished demeanor expected of someone from my social standing. His cashmere coat, carefully cleaned and pressed, was draped over my arm as I walked through the revolving doors of Atlantic Global Bank. The lobby was a testament to wealth and power. All marble floors, soaring ceilings, and hushed conversations. How different it felt to walk in as myself, watching the same security guards who had previously shooed me away, now nod respectfully in my direction. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm here to see Mr. James Morrison," I told the receptionist, my heart pounding beneath my composed exterior. She looked up, recognition flickering across her face. The Wellington name still carried weight in New York's financial circles. "Of course, Ms. Wellington. Mr. Morrison is in a meeting, but he should be finished shortly. Would you like to wait in his office?" Minutes later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 40 stories above Manhattan. The city sprawled below, a maze of possibilities and connections. I heard the door open behind me and turned to face him. The surprise on his face was immediate. "You're—" he started, recognition dawning in his eyes as he connected the dots between the woman before him and the person he'd met on the street. "The homeless woman from yesterday," I finished for him, managing a smile despite my nerves. "Though that's not entirely accurate. I'm Alexandra Wellington, and I came to return your coat, and to explain." He closed the door behind him, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite read. "I'm listening," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Instead of sitting behind it, he took the chair next to mine. Over the next hour, I told him everything. About my research, my passion for understanding social inequality, and my determination to experience it firsthand. "Your kindness yesterday wasn't just generous," I explained. "It was transformative. You treated me like a human being, not a statistic or a problem to be solved." James listened intently, his initial surprise giving way to genuine interest. "Most people in your position would be content with writing checks to charities," he observed. "What made you choose this path?" "Because numbers on a spreadsheet don't tell the whole story," I replied, feeling more animated as I spoke about my passion. I needed to understand the daily reality, the small indignities, the systematic barriers. How can I help create meaningful change if I don't truly understand the problem? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That's remarkable," he said finally. "Unconventional, perhaps even risky, but remarkable." We talked for hours, our conversation flowing naturally from social issues to personal stories. I learned about his own journey, how he'd worked his way up from a middle-class background through merit scholarships and sheer determination. He shared his frustrations with the banking industry's approach to community development and his ideas for change. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said suddenly, catching me off guard. "There's this small Italian place in the village. Nothing fancy, but the food is incredible. We can continue our discussion about sustainable community investment programs." I hesitated, knowing I should return to my research, but something in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I'd like that," I replied. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from my father's assistant. "Urgent family meeting. Come home immediately. Crisis situation." The message sent a chill down my spine. My father never called emergency meetings unless something was seriously wrong. I looked up at James apologetically, but before I could speak, he was already nodding in understanding. "Family emergency?" he asked, reading my expression. "Here's my card. My personal number is on the back. Rain check on dinner?" As I hurried out of his office, clutching his business card, I couldn't shake the feeling that my two worlds, the carefully constructed experiment and my real life, were about to collide in ways I couldn't predict. The urgent summons from my father loomed over me, but my mind kept drifting back to James's warm eyes and genuine smile. In the elevator, I quickly saved his number in my phone, my fingers hovering over the keys as I debated sending him a message. Finally, I typed, "Thank you for understanding. I'll explain everything once this family situation is resolved. Alexandra." His reply came almost immediately. "Take care of what you need to. I'll be here when you're ready to continue our conversation." Little did I know that the crisis awaiting me at home would test not only my family's resilience, but also this newfound connection that felt so promising. As my driver navigated through the city traffic toward our family estate, I found myself hoping that whatever storm was brewing wouldn't wash away this unexpected chance at something real. The Wellington estate loomed before me, its Georgian architecture usually a symbol of stability and tradition, now feeling more like the setting of an impending drama. As I walked through the grand entrance, the usual warmth of home was replaced by a palpable tension that hung in the air like a heavy curtain. I found my family gathered in Father's study, a room typically reserved for our most serious discussions. Mother sat rigid in her favorite armchair, her usual perfect posture now seeming more like a defense mechanism. Father stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the fading afternoon light, while our family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, arranged papers on the mahogany desk with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Alexandra, darling, please sit down," Mother said, her voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "We have something serious to discuss." Father turned from the window, and I was struck by how much he seemed to have aged in just the few days since I'd last seen him. "The company is in trouble, Alex," he said without preamble. "Serious trouble." Over the next hour, they laid out a nightmare scenario. Thomas Bradford, our family's trusted business partner for over 2 decades, had orchestrated a sophisticated scheme of financial manipulation. The damage was catastrophic. Wellington Industries, our family's century-old company that employed thousands, was teetering on the brink of collapse. "The numbers are staggering," Mr. Harrison explained, sliding documents across the desk. "The manipulation has left us vulnerable to hostile takeover attempts, and our stock price will plummet once this becomes public." "There must be something we can do," I insisted, my mind racing through possible solutions. "We have reserves, contingency plans." "We've explored every option," Father interrupted, his voice heavy with resignation. "But there's one possibility that could save everything." He exchanged a look with Mother that made my stomach clench. "The Blackwood family has offered to help," Mother said carefully, watching my reaction. "They're willing to arrange a merger that would save the company, preserve jobs, and maintain our family's position." I knew the Blackwoods: old money, massive influence, and a reputation for aggressive business tactics. "What's the catch?" I asked, though something in my mother's expression told me I already knew. "They have one condition," Father confirmed my fears. "They want to unite the families. Through marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Marriage? To Richard Blackwood?" I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Richard Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood Empire, known more for his appearances in society columns than his business acumen. We'd crossed paths at various social events, and while he was objectively handsome and charming, there had never been any spark, any connection. "Think of the employees, Alexandra," Mother pleaded. "Thousands of families depend on Wellington Industries. This isn't just about us anymore." My mind wandered to James, to our connection that had felt so genuine just hours ago. The universe seemed to be playing a cruel joke. The same day I found someone who saw the real me, I was being asked to marry someone else. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Blackwoods want an answer within the week," Mr. Harrison replied. "Time is of the essence given the market situation." I stood up, needing space to think. "I need some air," I announced, heading toward the door. No one tried to stop me. In the garden, I found my childhood swing, the one place that had always helped me think clearly. The evening air was cool against my face as I gently swayed back and forth, my mind a tornado of thoughts and emotions. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. James's number saved just hours ago, burning like a promise of what could have been. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. The legacy of 5 generations, thousands of employees, my family's reputation, all hanging in the balance. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had always helped me see things clearly. My best friend, Sophie Chen, who ran a successful tech startup and had never been afraid to tell me the hard truths. "Can you come over?" I asked when she answered. "I need your help with something impossible. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she replied without hesitation. "And I'm bringing wine." As I waited for Sophie, I couldn't help but think about how quickly life could change. This morning, my biggest concern had been explaining my research project to James. Now, I was facing a decision that would affect not just my future, but the futures of countless others. The garden lights flickered on automatically as darkness fell, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked, reminding me that beyond these walls, the real world continued turning, unaware of the drama unfolding within our family's carefully maintained facade. Sophie arrived exactly as promised, armed with 2 bottles of wine and the no-nonsense attitude I'd come to rely on over our 15 years of friendship. We settled into the treehouse, our childhood sanctuary that Father had converted into a sophisticated hideaway for us as adults, complete with comfortable seating and subtle lighting. "Okay, spill everything," Sophie commanded, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet. "And don't leave out any details about this mysterious banker you texted me about earlier." Over the next hour, I shared everything. The social experiment, meeting James, the family crisis, and the Blackwood proposal. Sophie listened intently, her expression shifting from amusement to concern to outright indignation. "Let me get this straight," she said, refilling our glasses. "You finally meet someone genuine? Someone who showed kindness without knowing your real identity? And the same day your family wants you to marry Richard, 3-page spread in Vanity Fair Blackwood? It's not that simple, Sophie. We're talking about thousands of jobs, people's livelihoods. And what about your life?" she interrupted. "Your happiness? Does that count for nothing?" I stood up, walking to the treehouse window that overlooked the city lights. Maybe personal happiness is a luxury I can't afford right now. The Wellington name comes with responsibilities. "That's your mother talking," Sophie said sharply. "The same mother who gave up her art career to be the perfect corporate wife. Is that what you want for yourself?" Her words hit home harder than she probably intended. I'd spent years watching my mother maintain her perfect facade, wondering if she ever regretted her choices. "What about James?" I whispered, more to myself than to Sophie. "What about him? Have you told him about any of this?" I shook my head. "How can I? I've known him for barely 24 hours. "But you feel something real?" Sophie pressed. "I can see it in your face when you talk about him." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Hope everything's okay with your family. Still thinking about our conversation today. There's so much more I want to discuss with you." Sophie read the message over my shoulder and raised an eyebrow. "Well, speak of the devil. What do I even say to him?" I asked, staring at the screen. "The truth might be a good start," Sophie suggested. "You're about to make a huge decision that affects both your lives. Doesn't he deserve to know?" She was right, of course. Sophie had always been my moral compass when my own seemed to be spinning wildly. I began typing a response, then deleted it, then started again. I need to tell him in person, I decided finally. He deserves that much. And what about Richard Blackwood? Are you really considering his proposal? I sank back into my chair, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I don't know. The logical part of my brain says it's the right thing to do. The company, the employees, our family's legacy. And what does your heart say? My heart? I laughed bitterly. My heart is currently sitting in a corner, having an existential crisis. Sophie set down her wine glass and leaned forward. "Alex, remember when we were 16, and you convinced me to sneak out to that protest against corporate environmental pollution? You said something I've never forgotten. Sometimes doing the right thing means disappointing the people you love." "That was different," I protested. "We were kids. The principle is the same. You've spent months living on the streets, studying wealth inequality, trying to make a real difference. Are you really going to throw away your chances at authentic happiness for a business arrangement disguised as marriage?" Just then, another text came through, this time from Richard Blackwood. "Looking forward to discussing our future together. Dinner tomorrow? The Plaza, 8 p.m. Sophie read it and made a gagging sound. Well, isn't he presumptuous? I stared at the 2 messages on my phone, James's genuine, warm text, and Richard's presumptuous dinner invitation. They represented the 2 paths before me, one of authentic connection and uncertain future, the other of security and duty. "I need to see James," I said suddenly, standing up. "Tomorrow morning. Before I make any decisions, I need to understand what's really possible between us." Sophie smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. Now that sounds like the Alex I know. But what about Richard's dinner invitation? "I'll deal with that tomorrow," I said, already composing a message to James. "Right now, I need to follow my instincts." As I typed out a message requesting to meet James for coffee the next morning, I felt a flutter of both excitement and fear in my stomach. I was potentially setting in motion events that could either save me or destroy everything my family had built. Sophie raised her glass in a toast. To following your heart, even when your head is screaming at you to be sensible. As we clinked glasses, I couldn't help but wonder if I was being brave or foolish. But one thing was certain. I needed to see James one more time before I could make a decision that would affect the rest of my life. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of winter day that makes Manhattan feel magical, rather than merely cold. I'd chosen a small coffee shop in Greenwich Village for my meeting with James, neutral territory, away from both our corporate worlds. At 7:30 a.m., I sat at a corner table, watching steam rise from my untouched cappuccino. James arrived precisely on time, looking somewhat less formal in a cashmere sweater and wool coat, rather than his usual suit. The moment our eyes met, I felt that same connection from his office, and my carefully prepared speech suddenly seemed inadequate. "You look worried," he said as he sat down, his voice gentle. "Is this about your family emergency?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, but it's more complicated than that. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything. The crisis at Wellington Industries, the Blackwood proposal, the impossible choice I was facing. James listened without interruption, his expression changing only slightly as I spoke, but his eyes never leaving mine. "So that's it," I finished, my hands wrapped tightly around my now cold coffee cup. "I have until the end of the week to decide whether to marry Richard Blackwood and save my family's company or follow your heart." James completed my sentence, speaking for the first time since I'd started my explanation. "Is that foolish?" I asked. "To even consider refusing when so many people's livelihoods are at stake?" James leaned forward, his expression intense. "Can I share something with you? Before I became executive vice president, I specialized in corporate restructuring. I've seen companies in worse situations than Wellington Industries recover without resorting to forced marriages." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you'll let me, I'd like to look at your company's financials. There might be other solutions that your advisors haven't considered. Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to see different possibilities." "You do that?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Alexandra," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "In the brief time I've known you, I've seen someone who's willing to live in shelters to understand social inequality, who carries the weight of thousands of employees' welfare on her shoulders, and who's honest enough to tell me everything instead of just disappearing. How could I not want to help? The warmth of his hand on mine felt like an anchor in a storm. But why? You barely know me." His smile was gentle but determined. "Because when I gave my coat to a homeless woman 2 days ago, I saw something in her eyes that touched my soul. Finding out who you really are has only made that connection stronger. I'm not ready to let that go without a fight." Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard Blackwood confirming dinner plans I hadn't agreed to. James noticed my expression darken. "The other suitor?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes. He expects me to have dinner with him tonight at the plaza, to discuss our future," I said, making air quotes with my free hand. "And will you go?" I looked at James, really looked at him, and made a decision. "No. I'm going to tell my family that I need time to explore all options before making any decisions. If you're willing to help look into alternative solutions, I'll clear my schedule," he said immediately. "We can start today if you'd like. I'll need to see the complete financial records, any contracts with Bradford, and the last 5 years of board meeting minutes." For the first time since hearing about the crisis, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I'll have everything sent to your office within the hour." As we stood to leave, James caught my hand again. "Alexandra, I want you to know something. Whatever we find in those financials, whatever decision you ultimately make, these past 2 days have shown me what real courage looks like. Not many people would risk everything to do what's right." I felt tears threatening to form and blinked them back. "Thank you for being willing to help. But James, you should know, if we can't find another solution, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," he said firmly. "But first, Let's see what we can do to save your family's legacy without sacrificing your future." As we walked out of the coffee shop together, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter, because there was now hope for an alternative solution, but heavier because I knew the next few days would test everything I believed about love, duty, and courage. I watched James hail a taxi, and before he got in, he turned to me one last time. "By the way, I still owe you that dinner at the Italian place in the village. Once we sort this out?" I nodded, managing a smile despite my churning emotions. "It's a date." As his taxi pulled away, I pulled out my phone to message Richard, canceling our dinner plans. Then I called my father's office. It was time to tell them I needed more time, and that I might have found another way to save everything we held dear. The next 48 hours became a blur of financial statements, legal documents, and endless cups of coffee. James had commandeered a conference room at Atlantic Global Bank, transforming it into our war room. Spreadsheets and documents covered every surface, and a digital countdown clock on his laptop reminded us of how little time we had left before the Blackwoods expected their answer. "Look at this," James said, pointing to a series of transactions on his screen. It was nearly midnight, and we were the only ones left in the building besides security. "These transfers to offshore accounts. They're sophisticated, but there's a pattern." I leaned over his shoulder, catching the familiar scent of his cologne. "Bradford's work?" "Yes, but he wasn't working alone. These transactions required approval from multiple levels. Someone else had to be involved." My heart sank. "Someone inside our board of directors?" James nodded grimly. "The question is, who? And more importantly, why didn't they stop this before it got so bad?" I slumped into a nearby chair, exhausted. We'd been working almost non-stop, trying to find a solution before I had to give the Blackwoods an answer. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from Richard and his father, each one more insistent than the last. "You should get some rest," James said softly, noticing my fatigue. "We can pick this up in the morning." "I can't," I replied, straightening up. "The Blackwoods want their answer in 36 hours. Besides, you're just as tired as I am." He smiled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "True, but I'm not the one who has to face a board meeting tomorrow morning." He was right about that. Father had called an emergency board meeting to discuss our options, and I had insisted on attending. What I hadn't told James was that Richard and his father would be there too, expecting me to announce my acceptance of their proposal. "James," I said hesitantly, "what if we can't find enough evidence in time? What if—" He cut me off by wheeling his chair over to face me directly. "Alexandra, listen to me. In the past 2 days, we've already uncovered enough irregularities to justify a full audit. We just need a little more time to put all the pieces together. Time is the one thing we don't have," I reminded him. "Then we'll make time," he said firmly. "I've already contacted some colleagues at the SEC. Once they see what we've found—" A notification ping from his computer interrupted him. He turned back to the screen, and I watched as his expression changed from frustration to surprise to triumph. "Got you," he whispered, fingers flying across the keyboard. "What is it? Remember those offshore transfers? I just found their destination. And you're not going to believe who's been receiving them." He turned the screen toward me, and I felt my breath catch. There, in black and white, was evidence that would change everything. Transfers leading directly to accounts controlled by none other than Maxwell Blackwood, Richard's father. "He's been working with Bradford this whole time," I whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. "They engineered this crisis to force the merger," James finished. "And your marriage to Richard would have sealed the deal, giving them complete control of Wellington Industries." I stood up and began pacing the room, my mind racing. "We have to stop them. But how do we prove all this before tomorrow's meeting?" James was already reaching for his phone. "Leave that to me. I have a friend at the Financial Crimes Unit who owes me a favor." "But, Alexandra?" He paused, looking at me seriously. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Are you ready for what might happen?" I thought about my family's legacy, about the thousands of employees counting on us, about the truth that needed to be exposed. Then I thought about James, who had worked tirelessly beside me, believing in me when I'd almost lost faith in myself. "I'm ready," I said firmly. But first, I need to tell my parents. They deserve to know before everything explodes tomorrow." James nodded, understanding. "Go. I'll keep working here and coordinate with my contacts. We'll meet early tomorrow before the board meeting." As I gathered my things to leave, James caught my hand. "Alexandra?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember you're not alone in this." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. "I know. And James, thank you for helping me fight for what's right." As I left the building and stepped into the cool night air, I felt both terrified and exhilarated. Tomorrow would change everything. For my family, for the company, and for my future. But for the first time since this crisis began, I knew I was making the right choice. I pulled out my phone to call my parents, ready to reveal the truth that would shake our world to its foundations. The night sky above Manhattan sparkled with stars, witnesses to the calm before the storm that was about to break. The Wellington Industries boardroom was eerily quiet at 8 a.m. the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tense faces around the massive mahogany table. My parents sat at one end, looking both regal and anxious after our late-night conversation. Maxwell Blackwood and Richard occupied the other end, exuding an air of smug confidence that made my skin crawl. I sat in the middle, dressed in a steel gray suit that felt like armor, with James beside me as my financial consultant. The other board members filled the remaining seats, unaware they were about to witness the most dramatic meeting in the company's history. "Before we begin," Maxwell Blackwood's voice cut through the silence, "I believe we're all here to hear Alexandra's decision regarding our generous proposal to save Wellington Industries." I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I have a different presentation prepared for today." I nodded to James, who connected his laptop to the room's projection system. "What is the meaning of this?" Maxwell demanded, his confident facade cracking slightly. "Please allow me to explain," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Over the past few days, we've uncovered some interesting information about the company's current crisis." The first slide appeared on the screen, a complex web of financial transactions. These documents show a systematic attempt to destabilize Wellington Industries through carefully orchestrated financial manipulation. "This is absurd," Maxwell interrupted, starting to rise. "We're here to discuss the merger, not indulge in conspiracy theories." "Sit down, Maxwell," my father said quietly but firmly. "Let her finish." I clicked to the next slide, showing the offshore account transfers. These transactions, authorized by Thomas Bradford, didn't just disappear into thin air. They went somewhere specific. I paused, looking directly at Maxwell Blackwood. "They went to accounts controlled by you." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Richard's face had gone pale, while his father's had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is slander," Maxwell shouted. "You have no proof." "Actually," James spoke for the first time, standing beside me, "we have extensive proof. The SEC received all of this information last night, and they're very interested in discussing it with you." As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened. 2 FBI agents entered, followed by several SEC officials. "Maxwell Blackwood," one agent announced, "we need you to come with us to answer some questions about certain financial transactions." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Maxwell lunged for his briefcase, but security was faster. Richard stood up, looking lost and confused, while board members watched in shocked silence as Maxwell Blackwood was escorted from the room. "I didn't know," Richard said suddenly, his voice shaking. "I swear, Alexandra, I had no idea what my father was planning." I believed him. The devastation on his face was too raw to be fake. "I know, Richard. This isn't your fault." The next hour was a whirlwind of statements, signatures, and explanations. The SEC officials outlined their ongoing investigation, while our legal team worked to stabilize the company's position. Through it all, James remained by my side, his quiet strength helping me maintain my composure. By early afternoon, the dust had begun to settle. The board voted unanimously to implement emergency measures to protect the company, and preliminary reports suggested we could recover most of the diverted funds. Wellington Industries would survive, stronger and more transparent than before. As the boardroom finally emptied, leaving just my parents, James, and me, Mother broke the tension by laughing softly. "Well, darling," she said, I think you've managed to surpass even your father's most dramatic board meetings." Father smiled, looking years younger now that the crisis was passing. "Alexandra, I owe you an apology. When you asked for time to explore other options, I thought you were just avoiding the inevitable. I should have had more faith in you." "She had help," I said, glancing at James with a smile. "We both did." My father extended his hand to James. "Mr. Morrison, it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude. Would you join us for dinner tonight? I believe we have much to discuss about the future." James accepted the invitation with a gracious nod, but his eyes were on me. In them, I could see the same mixture of relief, excitement, and possibility that I felt in my own heart. As we prepared to leave the boardroom, I paused at the window, looking out at the city sprawling before us. The morning's events had changed everything, yet somehow, I felt more centered than ever before. "Ready to go?" James asked softly, joining me at the window. I turned to him, remembering our first meeting just days ago on that cold street corner. "Ready for anything," I replied, meaning every word. 3 months after the dramatic boardroom revelation, I stood in my favorite spot in Central Park, watching the first signs of spring emerge. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fresh grass, and somewhere nearby, birds were welcoming the new day with their cheerful songs. So much had changed since that fateful morning. Maxwell Blackwood was facing federal charges, while Bradford had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency. Wellington Industries had not only survived, but was thriving under new transparency initiatives that I had helped implement. "I thought I'd find you here." James's voice came from behind me. He appeared at my side, holding 2 cups of coffee from our favorite village cafe. "Just thinking about everything that's happened," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Did you see the morning news? They're calling it the Wellington Renaissance. How we transformed a potential scandal into a model for corporate reform." James smiled, taking my free hand in his. "And how does the architect of this renaissance feel about her handiwork?" "Proud," I admitted, "but also grateful. None of this would have been possible without you. You give me too much credit. You were already fighting for what you believed in long before I came along. Speaking of which," he pulled a newspaper from his coat pocket. "Have you seen the latest impact report from your homeless advocacy program?" The program had been my first major initiative after the crisis, using company resources to create job training and housing assistance for homeless individuals. It was the perfect blend of my research interests and our corporate responsibilities. "The success rates are exceeding all projections," I said excitedly. "We've already helped over 300 people transition into stable housing and employment. And the best part is, other companies are starting to adopt similar programs, including Atlantic Global Bank," James added with a grin. "The board approved my proposal yesterday. We're implementing your model across all our branches." I turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes the same passion for positive change that had first drawn us together. "We're really doing it, aren't we? Making actual changes in people's lives?" "We are," he agreed, then hesitated slightly. "Which brings me to why I asked you to meet me here this morning." Something in his tone made my heart skip a beat. "James?" He took both my hands in his, our coffee cups forgotten on a nearby bench. "Alexandra, these past 3 months have shown me what's possible when 2 people share not just love, but a vision for making the world better. Every day with you has been an adventure in the best possible way." My breath caught as he lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm not asking you to marry me to save a company or fulfill any obligations," he continued, his voice full of emotion. "I'm asking because I want to spend the rest of my life building something meaningful with you, not just in business, but in every way that matters. Alexandra Wellington, will you marry me?" The ring he held was beautiful, but understated, a vintage piece that spoke more of lasting love than ostentatious display. It was perfectly us. "Yes," I whispered, then laughed with pure joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger and pulled me into a kiss, I heard applause. We broke apart to find my parents and Sophie standing nearby, all wearing huge smiles. "Finally!" Sophie exclaimed, rushing forward to hug us both. "I've been keeping this secret for weeks." My parents approached more sedately, but their joy was just as evident. "Welcome to the family, James. Father said warmly, while Mother wiped happy tears from her eyes. Later that evening, as James and I walked hand in hand through the village toward our favorite Italian restaurant, the dinner date we'd postponed during the crisis, I felt a profound sense of rightness. "You know," I said, stopping to look up at him, "that day you gave me your coat, I thought I was the one conducting an experiment about human nature. I never expected to be part of a much bigger experiment in love, trust, and courage." James pulled me close, kissing me softly. "Sometimes the best experiments are the ones we don't plan. They just find us when we're ready for them." As we continued our walk, I thought about all the chapters yet to be written in our story. There would be challenges ahead, of course, but also countless opportunities to make a difference in the world. Together. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, a perfect backdrop to this perfect moment. Our love story had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold morning, grown through crisis and triumph, and now opened into a future full of promise. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I started my social experiment all those months ago. It was better. A beginning disguised as an ending. A love story wrapped in a tale of corporate intrigue, and proof that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a single act of compassion.